Welcome to the University of Tasmania International Medicine webinar today. It's great to see everyone coming along. We've got about almost 100 participants today, so that's exciting. I'd like to acknowledge all participants from all across the globe, which we've received registrations from America, Canada, the UK, Malaysia, Taiwan, which is, it's going to be a great webinar today. So just a little bit of housekeeping. If you have any questions, please feel free to type in the Q&A or in the chat box, and then we will answer those questions after the presentation. So my name is Donna, and I'm one of the International Student Recruitment Officer at the University of Tasmania, and I'll be your host. So today we are very excited to introduce you to our presenter, Dr. Bailey Dunn. Dr. Bailey Dunn will be talking about medicine in Tasmania impacting the globe, and she'll be talking about career outcomes and international perspective in the medical program. And Dr. Bailey Dunn is a family doctor. She's a practicing GP as part-time, and while doing that, she also manages the Utas Global Medicine program. So Dr. Bailey, over to you.
Thank you very much, Donna, and thanks to everybody for joining us. I recognize that there are a number of different time zones represented in this group, and for some of you it is very late or very early, so thank you for joining us. I'm always really delighted to talk about our Utas program because I feel strongly about it. As Donna mentioned, my background is that of a GP or family physician if you're from North America. I was educated in Canada and United States and then moved to Australia roughly 10 years ago. So I have dual registration in Canada and Australia, and I'm happy to contribute to our international students in that I manage the entire global programs portfolio. So that includes our students who are at Oxford doing an honors program or the electives program, as well as all of the incoming international medical students, to make sure that we are supporting them as very best as we can. So it's a real privilege, and I do love my job. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have, but as Donna said, if we just save them to the end, that would be ideal. So Donna, I think if you want to, yeah, click ahead, that's perfect. Thank you. I'll just move that function out of the way. So we'll just go through these slides. I'll try to keep it as brief as possible. So we are the only medical school in Tasmania, and that serves as a huge benefit to our students. Why? Because we're the only program. We have access to 3 major teaching hospitals exclusively. So our students have access to those programs, those hospitals exclusively. And that means they get quite a breadth of knowledge. So we do everything in Tasmania from, we have organ transplant teams, which you typically wouldn't be seeing in a population of under 1 million people. But because we're a state, we must have those tertiary services. So one of the strengths of our program we find is that students have an opportunity to network really well. And they may not have that. They may just be sort of a number lost in a large cohort if they were anywhere else. Further to that, because much of the state is rural and remote, it gives us, our students, opportunities to experience quite a diverse range of medicine everywhere along the spectrum, from urban, like I said, tertiary hospitals in an urban setting, to quite rural and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander health that may be coastal, remote, and removed from access to a lot of healthcare. So it presents our students with a wide range of opportunities not necessarily seen in a lot of urban universities. You can skip to the next page, Jonah. Thanks. One of the focuses of our program, and it's certainly one that I'm involved in from a research perspective, is that the University of Tasmania is a world leader in a number of research areas. So one of them in particular is the Menzies Medical Research Center, which is a world leader in neuromuscular disease research, particularly multiple sclerosis. Our students are encouraged to partake in research projects from as early as year 1. We have a Bachelor of Medical Research program that feeds into the medical program. So by nature of that, we actually have a number of medical students already very interested in research. And even for those students coming in without that background, they're encouraged very early to get their feet wet as far as what is practicing in research like. We've got a few sort of standout research celebrities, if you can call them that. That's fine. One being, we affectionately refer to it as the oxygen baby breather machine. So Dr. Dargaville is one of the Utas staff members who has created a non-invasive means of improving oxygenation in preterm newborn babies, which has really been a game changer as far as keeping severely premature neonates alive. So that's now named the Hobart Method, and we're quite proud of that. The Air Raider app has, again, revolutionized how allergies and asthma are treated. It's a really neat program whereby, correct me if I'm wrong, Donna, I think it's 9 or 10 satellites have been set up around the entire state to pick up the levels of different pollens in the air. They can give warnings to people who suffer from asthma and allergies to prepare themselves, and it's significantly reduced the amount of hospitalizations and hospital presentations for respiratory infections and asthma-related respiratory disease. So it's really, the Menzies Institute for Medical Research is sort of the mecca in Australia when it comes to a lot of research areas, and we are absolutely delighted and proud to be linked with them. Next slide. Thanks. As I mentioned, so this research, it doesn't only impact our students here in Tasmania. Because we have a significant international cohort, these students end up graduating and going abroad. A number of them do research years elsewhere, particularly in Europe. So the research that's happening at Utas isn't necessarily exclusive to Tasmania. It is the part of a process, and it is the result and product of Tasmania being a hub for research in the world. So interestingly enough, the city of Hobart has more research PhDs per capita than any other city in the world. And this is exactly why. So we're home to the Menzies Research Institute, as well as the Tasmanian Antarctic division. So there's a lot of maritime science, marine engineering, medical sciences, many research areas that are very active in Hobart. And our students, being the only medical students in the entire state, have access to all of that. So it's pretty neat for them. Tasmania, specific to COVID, I think, has really been where Tasmania has I guess, been set apart, set itself apart from a lot of other states. As we're all aware, COVID has been horrible. And Tasmania has been quite lucky because it is a state very quickly, our borders were closed and we've been minimally impacted. So as a GP, I've seen that when compared to my colleagues who work in mainland Australia, and then similarly to my colleagues back in Canada, how that's been impacted. So we've been COVID-free now for, I think, since April 2020. So we're coming up on a year being COVID-free, which is pretty remarkable when you look at the state of what's happening in the rest of the world. Further to that, because of our remote location and our affiliation with these research institutes, as well as the Antarctic Division, Tasmania has been ahead of the 8 ball when it comes to online learning. We have been leaders in online learning for many years now, so we've been able to harness that, the history that we already have doing it and the expertise we already have in online learning, and translate that into the medical program, which traditionally has been face-to-face. So in April of 2020, we rolled out our year 1 Mbbs program online. That was only 2 months after the year 1 students had started, and we've been consistently really impressed. These students have been, they have adapted very well to online learning, and it's a big credit to those students, and we're immensely proud of them. And further to that, we've now been able to roll out year 1 and potentially year 2 for students who are limited by travel restrictions online. So our incoming class has started this week. We have 20 international students, which is a standard cohort size for international students, and they're starting year 1 online again. But this is already the second year that we're doing it. So fortunately, we've had an opportunity to be trendsetters in the region of COVID online learning. Next slide. I'm just gonna have a quick drink of water. This is an area I feel really strongly about, which is career outcomes. So a bit of background is that when I entered Australia, it was for uni. I had every intention of going back to Canada. And I fell in love with Australia, which I think if any of you have visited, you'll probably appreciate. Further to that, I fell in love with Tasmania and I wanted to stay. The problem being that internships, which is the 1 year of supervised training that every medical student must complete in Australia, intern spots can be very competitive. So in every state, other than Tasmania, there are more medical graduates than intern spots available. So for example, I trained in Queensland. It was nearly impossible. It's just a supply and demand issue. Nearly impossible for medical graduates to secure an internship. Without that internship, your medical degree cannot be used in clinical practice. So you absolutely need to complete that internship. And that is the #1 issue on the radar of incoming international students is, will I get an internship when I graduate? They've invested 5 years of their time and money into this degree, and they want to ensure they're employable. And the fantastic thing about Utas, which I'm very proud of, is that in the 52 years of our program, we have a 100% success rate in our students securing an internship. Like I said, that's par for the course when you're the only medical school in the state. But what's neat about that is students actually have a sense of autonomy and they can complete their internship at a hospital of their choosing, as opposed to being forced to complete an internship simply because that's where they were allocated. So we're very lucky, and it's very reassuring to our international students to know that they'll study for 5 years and they have that job security at the end of 5 years. Further to that, so once students complete their intern year, they can choose to stay in hospital as what's called a resident, not part of a training program, or they can further study in a training college. So in North America, these are called medical residencies. In Australia, they're called training programs or training colleges. So Tasmania has all of the training colleges offered. And it's often a very desirable place to do your postgraduate medical residency or medical training, because it's often a smaller cohort size while still having access to the same resources. And then further to that, so slightly farther down the track, would be employment. So much like any region of a country that is somewhat more isolated than the mainland, there is a problem with physician recruitment and retention. A lot of doctors prefer to be in larger urban areas, and therefore recruiting and retaining physicians in Tasmania does remain an issue. Tasmania's population is growing rapidly, particularly with COVID, I think because we've done so well. A lot of mainlanders, as we call them, are moving down to Tasmania. So the population is growing rapidly. We've seen that over the last 5 years, and that's likely to persist for another 5 years. So you have this rapidly growing population without the necessary allied health and doctors. And what that means is that doctors remain on a list of state-sponsored immigration jobs. So what it means for our international students is that if they've realized throughout their 5 years that Australia is a place they'd like to permanently call home and apply for permanent residency, they can actually apply for state-sponsored permanent residency sponsorship. And that is a streamlined process. Now it changes every year, but when I did it, well, it's probably, I think I became a citizen about 5 years ago. Once I submitted my paperwork, I received state-sponsored migration, I think within 3 or 4 weeks. which is very different than applying to other states. So it's something for our students to keep on their radar, is this idea of ongoing job security, that if Australia is a place they want to call home, Tasmania is a really good option for them. Next slide. So commonly asked questions are about our curriculum. And Donna, please step in at any point if you want to add to this. So questions we're often asked are relating to how many hours is a student spending in the classroom, as opposed to a lab, as opposed to clinical placement in hospital or the community. Now, if you think about that, that's sort of, it's more of a graduated step process. So year one is less face-to-face interaction with community members and patients, and more theoretical knowledge. However, what sets Utas apart from other programs is that even week one of year one, students have access to a group of community members called standardized patients. In this picture here, this is one of our medical students, Gabby. She's now an intern. Gabby is practicing her communication skills with a standardized patient. A standardized patient is a patient in the community, so they're not a staff member of the university, who has kindly volunteered to be part of our program. And they are an immensely useful group of people who our medical students owe a lot to. They're very patient, they're very knowledgeable, they kindly help our medical students learn how to effectively communicate as a junior in the medical world. It can be very intimidating. So the standard North American model is more didactic lecture hall teaching for the first few years of medicine. And then years 3, 4, or 5, you're in hospital. So that can be really intimidating to jump from didactic learning to suddenly having to take a very sensitive history from a patient. These standardized patients are an invaluable resource that we're very proud of. And so even though we're doing online teaching, students have access to virtual classrooms where we're still utilizing the standardized patients. So that is continuous through years 1 and 2. And that would make up the main face-to-face patient interaction. As they progress through the program, they're then introduced to placements like the general practice placement, where they come and sit in with myself and our colleagues at medical practices around the state. They can be urban or rural, it's up to the student. As well as pediatrics placements. There's a getting to know a local family placement. So we try to involve our students in formal and informal teaching when it comes to improving their communication skills. And then years 4 and 5 are entirely in hospital. So you sort of graduate to having more face-to-face interaction. And our students are consistently rated very highly by the staff members in hospital as being really effective communicators. By the time they get to year 4 and 5 and they're in hospital, they feel very, very ready to engage with patients, and not just confident, but also capable. Further to that is, and this is specific to my role, as an international, I realized how difficult it is to gain dual registration. And that's often on the radar of our students. So when we have students, for example, from North America who come to our program, for Canadians, for example, studying abroad is a very common pathway for medicine. Almost all of these students will have a desire to keep the option open to repatriate to their home country once they've finished their studies. You really never know what life has in store, so it's a nice option to keep open. So our Canadian pathway is just one example of how we do that. So I manage the Canadian pathway because I've been through that process myself. And what we do is we integrate the Canadian prerequisites for medical residency application within our program. So our students that are in the Canadian pathway will simultaneously complete all of the necessary requirements to practice medicine in Australia and apply for an Australian internship, while also completing all of the Medical Council of Canada qualifying exams, which fulfill their requirements to apply to Canadian residencies following graduation. The nice thing for them is that they're simultaneously completing these requirements. When they come to the point of graduation, they've got 2 countries that they can apply to. And we're happy to facilitate that for other students as well. So we have an American student in our program right now who has expressed interest in completing the USMLEs. So my job was to sit down with her and map that out over 5 years, how she can simultaneously complete both requirements. And we also allow students to take breaks in the program to complete those exams. The nice thing about it is that we have a thriving electives program. So students can spend between 3 and 10 weeks of the program studying at another university. And that often includes the university or country that they want to return to following graduation. So we're one of the few Australian programs who has access to the American Medical Elective Rotation Program, as well as we have partner universities in Canada and across Europe. So it's very easy for our students to complete electives anywhere they like, really. And then, yes, just cementing that idea that we can now offer and have been for the last year, offering year one entirely online with a really great success rate, actually. Next slide, please, Donna. Now, time for questions. I can see a few have popped up. Now, Donna, because you're screen sharing, I may let you actually moderate those questions if you don't mind, and I'll just be here to answer them.
Absolutely. Okay. So we got a question. So the first one is there a quota for student enrollments for the medicine or
yes,
the program?
Yeah, so every year our cohort is limited to 120 students. That's small by Australian program standards, and we have no intention of increasing that. The reason being is that we can really effectively deliver medical education for 120 students. 20 of those spaces are reserved for internationals. You'll find there are certainly programs that have up to 400 in their intake year. And particularly with COVID, it illuminated how important it is for us to have small cohorts. The thing I noticed when coming to Tasmania from another mainland university was this one-on-one interaction between staff members and students at Utas is like nothing I've ever seen. When I was in medical school, I was very much a number. I don't think I had a single faculty member know my name. I was really okay with that. That was part of my expectation for medical school, but that's not at all Utas. It's, for example, week 1, we have a staff and student barbecue where everyone gets to know each other. It's not unusual for students and staff to be in a cycling group, to go bushwalking together. Everybody gets to know each other through 5 years very, very well. And that can only be achieved when you have a small cohort. So that's certainly one of our strengths, that we are absolutely limited to 120, 20 of which are international.
Thank you, Bailey. There's one interesting question in here that I would like to answer. Why is it difficult to retain doctors in Tasmania?
Really good question. I think what contributes to that is people tend to stay where they were educated. So we know that if you attended medical school in Sydney, you're more likely to establish your medical career in Sydney. So most Tasmanian grads will stay in Tasmania because the quality of life is quite high, but they've networked really well in that state. So it's not necessarily that Tasmania has any more difficulty than any other part of Australia. It's more the problem that the Tasmanian population is growing so rapidly that we can't keep up.
Thank you, Bailey. The next question is about the quota. Just to follow up on your answer to your first question. Is the 120 quota for both international students and domestic students, or just for international students?
So it's a 120 total, 20 of which will be international. So only 20 international per year. And we have 1 intake per year in February.
Thank you. Maybe following with that, can you please tell us about the entry requirements for this course?
Sure. So the entry requirements are, we're open to undergraduate and postgraduate level students. We are an undergraduate degree, but every year we do have a mix of those who are high school leavers or high school graduates, and those who have either completed part of a bachelor's degree or have completed an entire degree. So the entry requirements change quite subtly depending on what your latest academic achievement is. So using your latest academic achievement, we ask that applicants have completed at least 1 year of English and chemistry. So for high school leavers, that's year 12, chemistry, English and maths. For those at an undergraduate level, they'll be graded on their GPA achieved in over 1 year of those topics. For English language requirements, we have an IELTS requirement of 7 overall and 7 in each band. We will accept one band of 6.5, but no lower. Beginning next year, that will actually change a little bit. And this has been a few years in the making, but we will be recognizing completion of a degree in English or completion of 2 years studying in English that is within the last 5 years. So that does need to be approved by the Senate. So don't quote me on the last part, but it'll be published on the website as soon as it is approved by the Academic Senate. But there will be recognition of prior learning in English. If you are a student who has, for example, we have a number of international students who have recently studied in Australia. Either they've completed a Bachelor of Science degree, a Bachelor of Arts degree, or perhaps they attended boarding school where it was entirely instructed in English. So starting with next year, we'll be able to accept that, and students will be exempt from having to take IELTS.
Mm-hmm. And in addition to that, also, Bailey, for those students who come from an English speaking country such as the USA, UK, Canada, Singapore, they will be meeting the English requirements, so they won't be doing any English test.
Yes, thank you for reminding me. Yes, there is the list of countries that are an exception to the rule, and that's pretty standard across every medical school in Australia. So it's not as if the Utas list of exceptions is any different to any other country. Mm-hmm. And then further to the language and academic criteria is the examination criteria or examination requirements. So students are required to take one of 2 standardized exams, either the ISAT, which is administered by a program called ACER. The ISAT is a 3-hour computer-based exam designed for students without a science background. So it's entirely a means of assessing critical reasoning and, critical thinking and qualitative reasoning. I quite like it as an exam. It helps us appreciate the students who are problem solvers. Medicine is entirely about being able to read between the lines and solve a problem. And we know that students who can critically analyze a scenario and problem solve are going to do well in medicine, as opposed to the student who is excellent at rote learning and memorizing very well for the purpose of an exam. Exam skills do not make a physician. Effective communication does. So we quite like the ISAT exam. It is 3 hours, so it is shorter than other standardized exams, and it can be taken in most countries around the world in most major cities. With COVID, now you can do it at testing centers, many more testing centers rather. Further to that, the second test that will be considered is an Mcat. So that's the Medical College Admission Test. That's a North American and American standardized exam. Typically, that's done by students who are at least halfway completed a Bachelor of Science degree and have a biology, chemistry, physics background. So we accept both of them. Students are only required to take one, and we don't preference one or the other over the other. Rather, they just sort of appeal to different populations.
Thank you, Bailey. Another follow-up regarding entry requirements is that, are there any specific entry requirements for students from a specific country, such as the US or Canada? And can international student apply for Canadian pathways? Maybe that's another follow-up question after that.
Oh, right. No, so the first question, do entry requirements change by country? No.
Yeah.
Every international student is compared to the same standard. There's no separate standard depending on the country you come from, with the only exception being what Donna mentioned, that there are a few countries whereby English is the standard level of instruction and they're exempt from having to take IELTS. The second part of that question was the Canadian pathway. Mm-hmm. So we've never had a non-Canadian ask about the Canadian pathway, simply because in order to apply to Canadian residencies, you typically need Canadian permanent residency. Now you can, I have a colleague who did complete his residency in Canada despite being Australian. So certainly if the interest is there, if students are really keen to take another set of exams, there's nothing we would do to stop them. It's certainly open to everyone, but typically it attracts Canadian citizens and permanent residents.
Thanks, Bailey. Another question is in relation to studying remotely with the COVID-19 situation. A question from Eva saying that, can offshore students study remotely for the courses in medical faculty? I know that medical students can study online, but of course other courses, it's it's different, like nursing.
Oh, I see. So is the question other programs within the College of Health and Medicine?
Yes, yes.
I'm sorry, I don't know the answer to that question.
Yeah.
I only work within the MBBS program. Yeah. So I'm sorry.
We'll get back to you. Yeah, Eva will get back to you on other courses, but such as the laboratory medicine course, nursing, and other related courses, like the Master of Applied Science courses, they won't be offered remotely. So students will have to be on campus for those courses. But for our medicine course, as Bailey has mentioned a while back, that we have been successful in offering this course online for a year now. So this is our second year. Okay, there is another question in here, Bailey. Other universities are offering Doctor of Medicine, and the university is, our university is offering MBBS. What's the difference between the two?
Yeah, we get asked this quite a bit. The difference between an MBBS and an MD, if we're thinking long game as far as career outcomes, the difference is negligible. The difference as far as academia is that an MD tends to be a postgraduate entry course. So typically to enter an MD program, an applicant must have already completed an undergraduate program. That's slowly changing. You'll see around the world, we are finding more MD undergraduate entry programs. Typically, however, an MD is a postgrad program and it's more of a North American model. An MBBS is longer than 4 years. So our program is 5. Some MBBS programs are 6, but it's open to undergraduate entry, meaning students can begin their medical studies immediately from high school. The difference as far as course content is quite subtle, actually. With an MD program, you have a longitudinal research project. So starting in 2022, for intake in 2023, our program becomes an MD program. So we'll be utilizing that relationship with the Menzies Medical Research Institute for students to complete a 3, 4, or 5-year research project throughout their degree. And that they'll graduate then with an MD as opposed to an MBBS. But as far as career outcomes go, there's no difference between an MD and an MBBS. It's more about the academic content that is quite subtly different.
Thanks, Bailey. Going back to the entry requirements and quota, someone has asked if the quota is full already for the 2021 intake for international students, and when is the last day to apply? I can answer. The last day to apply would be on the 1st of March. And last day to accept your offer is the 4th of March, and the last day of enrollment will be the 8th of March for international students. What about the quota, Bailey? Have we filled up the...
So we have reached 20 international students. There is capacity in very few years that has been as high as 22 when we've had students accept a very late offer. So I suppose if we had a really eligible candidate apply this week, it is possible. We tend not to see that many offers this late. Students are usually quite organized and sort of sort these things months ago. But I suppose I don't know the answer. It's never been done this late in the game, but I don't know. Donna, what is your answer to that?
It is still doable as long as they meet all the entry requirements.
Okay.
So that academic requirements, and yeah, it's still possible as long as, like I said, it's all ready to go. Bailey, another follow-up question, but most of the questions are relating to ISAT score, but we can actually forward the information onto our participants regarding the specific entry requirements, such as that score and what's the specific prerequisite for medicine. Or would you like to talk about that? So
yeah, I mean, I can briefly talk about it. ISAT students require an overall score of 50. It's very, very rare that a student would be considered for admission if their score is less than 50. It's happened fewer than a handful of times, and that's only when a student has really proven academic success despite that. So if when we had a student who had completed a master's in biomedical sciences and for whatever reason performed really poorly, not really poorly, just under 50% on the ISAT, and they were accepted, but that would be unusual. So we would encourage students to apply for those students having a score of 50 overall on the ISAT, and the minimum requirement for the Mcat is 491 overall, and it has to be within the last 5 years.
And is it the same for ISAT? What's the expiration of ISAT?
I think that's 5 years as well. That may be, pardon me, that may be clarified on the information that you'll send out, but I think that's 5 years.
Thank you. In relation to application, for students who fall marginally short of the entry grades required, is there a foundation program that they will be given an offer for?
No, so we don't have a foundation program. There used to be one. The Bachelor of Medical Research program was previously in existence. And as far as I know, Donna, that doesn't exist anymore. Is that right?
We do offer the Foundation Studies program.
Okay.
Provided that they will do really, really well in their grades. They have to have 90 plus.
Okay.
GPA.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that. So typically I would only be seeing the students who meet all the criteria. So I probably shouldn't have been the best person to answer that question.
But it's still not a guarantee of entry into the medicine though. They will still have to meet the other requirements as an ISAT and English requirement. Just going back to the other questions regarding clinical placements. Just have to go back to the question. Okay, I would like to double confirm if international students are able to secure the internship in Tasmania after their study.
Yes. So while the internship process is not moderated by universities, it's entirely run by hospitals themselves. So legally, we actually can't guarantee and say, yes, this hospital will hire you because it's not a process we manage. In 52 years, every single one of our students has secured an internship. So there's a track record there that is very, very reassuring. A large part of that is students are already working in that healthcare system for a few years as medical students. It's an opportunity to network really well. And by the time it comes to applying for an internship, they've already established a really good working relationship with that program and would be top of the list for hire. So yes, while I can't legally say they're guaranteed a spot, we've got 52 years of track record to sort of support that theory.
Thank you. If another question, Bailey, if students enter Mbbs, can they study Bachelor of Medical Research and then being transferred or apply again for Mbbs? Can they be credited for the units they have studied in their Bachelor of Medical Research?
So they can certainly choose that as an option to use that as a stepping stone to get into medicine. We have a number of students who complete Bachelor of Medical Research, but that tends to be because they want to have a background in medical research. We do not give credit for prior learning in the program. most Australian medical schools require completion of the entire degree and will not give advanced standing to any previous knowledge.
Thank you, Bailey. Other universities are interviewing MBBS student applicants. Is there an interview for the final selection at Utas?
No, we don't have an interview as part of the selection criteria. We have what's called an entry interview. So once students enter the program, we've just done these last week. Once they enter the program, we sit down with them and get to know them a little bit better. So we have found that previously when interviews were used, it actually just created a lot of anxiety in students, and the outcome actually wasn't changed as far as the cohort. So no, now we use our interview time. Once they're in the program, their first day, we sit down with them and work out what is their style of learning and how can we make the MBBS program a success for them, as opposed to interviewing for the purpose of determining who's not going to get a spot.
Thanks, Bailey. One question asking about the diversity of the class. So Chinese students being studying medicine right now?
Sorry, I missed the last part of the question.
How many Chinese students studying medicine right now?
That's a really good question. I don't have the answer to that. I mean, we have a culturally diverse medical community because 1/5 of our cohort is international, but the breakdown as far as where students are from each year does change based on global trends. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 Chinese students who identify as Chinese entering our program this year. So this is their first week. So that would be high to have 8 of 20. That's a high number. But that's just a snapshot.
Okay, thanks for that. We've got about, maybe we'll have 2 more questions and then we're about to close the webinar. So the question is, for the future career after graduation, will most of the students stay in Tasmania as a doctor? Will they go to other states or even go to their home countries?
So this changes every year. It depends on a few things. It depends on what is the current climate of international students' home country. So for example, we foresee a lot of North American students wanting to stay in Australia or stay in Tasmania last year and this year because of the current climate of COVID. We'll see less travel. We tend to see approximately 50% of our cohort stay in Tasmania. What happens to them after 2, 3, 4, 5 years when they've completed their training entirely? I'm not sure, but I would say it probably stays around 50%. And that seems to be the national average, that you tend to stay where you trained. I would say only a handful would repatriate to their home country following graduation, following training. It's a large majority of that cohort has already made an effective social network and professional network, and they stay where they completed their training.
Excellent. Thank you, Bailey. There was a lot. This is the last question. Will this webinar be recorded? And definitely it's being recorded. As I understand, some of our agents are 6 o'clock, barely just waking up, 6 o'clock. So we have recorded this for you, and we will be sending this via email as soon as possible. So this has been a really great webinar, isn't it, Bailey? I'm sorry that we could not accommodate all of your questions, but we have gotten them. We'll get back to you with answers. And yeah, so if you have more questions, feel free to email us. There is an email address down the bottom, or you can give us a call. There's a phone number there. And yeah, thank you very much and have a great day for everyone. Once again, I'd like to acknowledge Bailey for her wonderful presentation, as always.
Oh, thanks very much, Donna. No, this is a pleasure. I feel really strongly about our program. It's sort of experience I wish I had had in medical school. So I feel really strongly about it. I love working here, and I'm always happy to talk about our MBBS program. So yes, I'm happy to help in any way. But thank you very much to everybody for taking the time to listen.
Bye, everyone.
Take care.
Take care. Bye.